Everyone, welcome back to Trippy Book Club, where we're reading Shattered Silence, Melissa G. Moore, The Untold Story of a Serial Killer's Daughter. Now, in our last episode, we read chapters 1 through 3, and we've seen quite a few similarities to G. Rose's book, which is why the Trippy Tribe wanted to read this, is because since Melissa G. Moore was a ghostwriter on Gypsy Rose's book, we wanted to kind of see some similarities in writing styles. I do see a lot of grammatical errors. I don't know if she had the same person that actually proofread both books, but it is, in my opinion, that this was done very similarly, just at different times. Because again, this was published in 2009, but I think that Melissa Moore has become the poster child to creating a name for yourself from a horrible situation. Now, if you guys are not already following me or subscribed to me, definitely subscribe so we can get this finished. I just wanted to remind you guys that I am actually dropping my podcast, so it should already be out by the time I upload this. So definitely it will be uploaded here on YouTube, but to get it right when it comes out, definitely listen on most podcast platforms. I'm working on getting them published everywhere, but it will be only available certain places. My first deep dive will actually be Melissa G. Moore, and my main goal in creating videos, as well as after we're done with this book, and after I do the deep dive, what will then happen is I also want to do a deep dive on only the victims of Melissa Moore's father, the Happy Face Killer's victims, so then we can breathe that to light. And that's kind of how my pattern will be with my podcast. Is I will not only am I going to continue reading here, but I will most likely do deep dives on things I'm reading or things I'm watching, and then we will deep dive even further with victims or missing people around the cases, things like that. And then from there as well, with my podcast, there will be recaps of what has happened during the whole week, because I know with certain certain things happen, and my podcast will be about what we talk about here: true crime, conspiracy theories, and gossip. And of course, we blur the lines in between all three all the time. So definitely check it out and definitely subscribe to that. I'd really appreciate it. Now today, this video is going to be cut in a few sections, so I may be wearing different things. I'm gonna try not to get like that far behind, but I do have to work today and have to pick up kids, so this may be cut into a smaller section, but I'm gonna try to get through with at least one chapter today, and then we will continue. Again, this won't be uploaded and you won't see any of this, the magic of YouTube, but we are on chapter 4. It's called The Burning. Life felt rich and full and comfortable in Yakima, especially in the quiet, peaceful home my mother kept for us. The only thing that was missing was Dad. When he was gone on his long hauls during that time, my parents appeared to have few arguments, or at least they did not argue in front of us. My father prided himself on the fact that he never laid a hand on my mother or any of us. I also think he prided himself on being different from his father in that respect. One evening, Dad arrived home looking exhausted as usual. Something seemed a little different about him, but I couldn't place it. We all cheered and ran up to him to hug him. Carrie hugged his tall legs and he picked her up. "Let's play, Daddy," she cried, delighted as he swung her around. He had never refused to play with us, so we weren't afraid to request a game. "Leave your poor father alone," scolded Mom. "He's tired. You can play with him tomorrow." But then she laughed as we ended up on the floor in giggles. The next day, I didn't want to go to school, which was strange for me. I loved Garfield Elementary and my teachers, and I had made some great friends. Now that I was in second grade, I enjoyed my full day of learning. This morning, however, I woke up with the feeling that something was wrong. I thought it had to do with my dad leaving again. I wanted I wanted to stay home with him every minute until it was time for him to depart. Mom wouldn't allow it, so I dragged my feet out to the bus and grudgingly got on. So, she's in second grade right now, so wonderful to note that. At school, I actually had a good day. As I ignored the growing feeling of danger, chalking it up to missing my dad, I almost had an argument with myself, wanting to tell the feeling to shut up and go away. I hadn't felt the ominous feeling in so long. I didn't want to acknowledge it anymore. I wanted to pretend it wasn't real, or at least that it wasn't always right. So again, she's getting like a foreboding feeling right now. And again, she's in second grade. So she says she hasn't felt this for a very long time, but she's still very young. She's in second grade, so she's about 7 or 8. When the bell rang, I got onto the bus, making my way to the back bench. I loved sitting there because it was different from all the other seats and made me feel special. Surrounded by friends, I urged the bus to go faster, hopeful that maybe Dad would still be there when I got home. As we made our way along the winding roads from Garfield, I started feeling sick. The bus seemed hot, even with the windows down, and I felt myself sweating much, which was unusual. I got more and more uncomfortable in my seat, wondering if I was going to throw up. The ominous feeling inside me had grown to a nauseating alarm. I glanced over at my buddies on the bus, wondering if I looked as horrible as I felt. I saw from their faces that something was wrong, horrendously wrong. There was a great honking alongside of us, and we looked over, our faces pressed to the glass. People were driving up, honking, waving, and pointing frantically at the rear portion of the bus. Suddenly, there was a frightened screech, and I saw it, flames shooting out of the back of the vehicle. I began to scream, joining those of 40 or 50 other children. We all shouted at the same time as I'm sorry, as black, thick black smoke and more flames enveloped us. My bus seat was on fire. The driver stopped abruptly, and then the doors opened. The pandemonium of frightened children erupted outward as each child tried to save his own life. The heat and smoke were intense, and all I could hear was the screaming and screaming. Suddenly, I was transported into a memory that I had shoved down in my attempt to forget it forever. A stray cat had gotten stuck in our burn barrel at our house in Tapanash. It couldn't get out, and its frightened meows had alerted Jason and my father. Instead of springing it loose, however, as my brother and I thought he would, Dad had poured gasoline on the pile of debris in the barrel and lit it on fire in front of us. The cat's agonizing screams melded with Jason's and my own. Now I could hear our screaming again, along with the children on the bus and my father's jarring laughter. In the midst of the smoke and the mayhem, I thought I was going to die, like the stray cat. I felt the part of me wanted to die. As everything was going black, I was suddenly whisked up off the bus, even even though the driver was still toward the front, trying to evacuate children in a safe and orderly manner through the bedlam. So this is a horrific incident. I'm really interested in. I'm gonna be watching over the next week or so. I'm gonna be watching some of documentaries and a little bit of YouTube videos on Melissa Moore, so I can kind of get more insight on some of these events, because a lot of the events she said, with the last chapters with the kittens and all of that stuff, and now with the bus, there's a lot of real traumatic events that go into it. And now we learn that it's not only traumatic events with her father, so that's a very interesting thing as well. Fortunately, every kid made it off the bus, and no one was seriously burned or injured. When another dropped me off at my bus stop on the other side of the orchard, I ran through the trees, blinded my tears. Normally, I love strolling through the huge orchard and playing in and out of the trees. This time, I panicked and got lost. Everywhere I looked, the trees all looked the same. I ran on, never finding my way home. The friendly orchard had turned into another nightmare. Help me. A short while later, I was surprised to feel that a calm had come over me. I was calm enough to recognize where I was and found my way back home. When I saw my mother, I collapsed into her arms. By the look on my tear-stained face and the smell of acrid, acrid ACRID, smoke. I don't know if that's a word or not. I've never seen it, but I digress. In my clothes and hair. She knew I was telling the truth about the bus. With a look of great concern, she whisked me into the house and checked my body for burns. She found only scratches from the trees, but I ignored those and quietly asked to go to my room. My mother searched my face, wondering if I had inhaled some of the smoke. Usually I would have enjoyed her attention and play up the drama of a good story. Now all I wanted to do was escape, to feel that the bus and the barrel weren't real, couldn't be real. Again, so like she takes back to a kitten that was stuck into a barrel. So we hear about another kitten. And we hear about this incident that brings up those emotions, right? So very triggering, I guess, emotion. And we'll see. Again, she is around 8 or 7, 8, 9, around there at this time. The next morning, I was shaking uncontrollably as I slowly took each step onto my school bus. I saw 1 or 2 other pale faces and wide, frightening eyes. Now I didn't feel so alone. I had something in common with my classmates. The other memory was shoved deep inside, and I pretended once again that it had never happened. Searching for a seat, I refused to sit anywhere near the back, and even my eyes avoided the rumble seat. I promise I will never ignore another warning. I was never made aware of what caused that small fire, but I did make it to and from school that day without another mishap. Still, it took me several weeks before I could get on a bus without trembling. So we have an incident of a bus catching on fire, or the back of a bus catching on fire. I'm trying to imagine it in my mind, and I think that people that read a lot have these imaginations that are like top tier. So like what I am imagining right now is basically like a bus, and you know the seats on the back of a bus are basically like all, from what I remember, like if again, this was later on, this was not, you know, in the day we live in right now. This was quite some time ago. And you know, the back of the bus, the only thing that's not a back of the bus is just that it's a stool, right? So it really could have been anything, even to, you know, like gas that caught fires, so something like that. But the fact that it's so convenient that it brought up some emotions within her is really wild to me, because it sounds to me, and I'm not insinuating here, this is just solely my opinion, it sounds to me like, again, I'm gonna watch some documentaries and stuff to see what she says and what she doesn't, but again, it sounds like a story that was fabricated in order for her to bring up another story about kittens. Again, that's just my opinion, but it really seems like, you know, the start of life from the age of 1 to possibly 9 at this point has been very chaotic and very all over the place. And it's not just to do with her dad at this point. It's to do with the moving. It's to do with extended family members, her mother, her brother and sister, now this bus that caught on fire. So let's see what happens. Okay guys, so excuse me because I had to cut to day 2 of doing this because I had to go to work. But we are now on chapter 5, which is called Wrong Number. It was several months before I encountered another foreboding. It came upon me strongly and suddenly, a couple of days before my father returned from a long trip. He had been away for ages this time. He was starting to spend longer periods working. He was making good money, so my parents didn't argue much with each other. While my mother didn't seem to mind his absences as much as Carrie, Jason, and I did, I could tell she missed him too. She was always eager to answer the phone to find out when he would be on his way home. A couple of times she hung up with a confused look on her face. Apparently, a lot of women had been getting wrong numbers lately. Dad arrived home, and as usual, we were all delighted to see him. After our play and wrestling routine, he announced he would be able to stay home for a few days. We cheered, reveling in the idea that we would get to spend some time with him. Since Mom always had a lengthy list of to-dos for him, Dad promised to take me, Jason, and Carrie into town with him to pick up some supplies so he can tackle his list. We were thrilled because it meant more time with Dad, and that usually meant an ice cream, donut, or some other special treat, like Carrie's gummy worms. Often we went to this place he knew best, which were truck stops. The next morning, Dad's energy seemed particularly high, and I noticed he whistled a lot as we shopped. Sorry, let me reread that. The next morning, Dad's energy seemed particularly high, and I noticed he whistled a lot as we shopped. He seemed eager, and I found myself feeling that same emotion in the pit of my stomach. Did he have a gift for Mom? Sometimes when he was away, he picked up something special to surprise her. He hadn't done that for a while, and I believed that must be the case. I looked forward to going home, especially because all three of us kids were getting tired. Finally, we finished the shopping and arrived at the truck stop restaurant. I was tired, but I was even hungrier, and I couldn't wait to order. Suddenly, a woman came up to our table. She wasn't the waitress, and as I peered at her curiously, my dad jumped up. "Hey kids," he said, clearing his throat. "I want to introduce you to someone. This is a friend of mine. Her name is Tony." "Hello," she said simply, and we returned her greeting. I thought it was strange that she acted nonchalant, even shrugging like we weren't that important, but her eyes were studying us carefully. I decided to study her, too. She was wiry and slim, so slim that she could wear children's-sized clothing and shoes. Her brown thin hair was feathered back in a style she might have kept from the 1970s. I noticed that her voice was rough and coarse, like smokers get after a while. She seemed to want to prove to my father that she was independent and tough, even. We found out that she had 2 young children like us, a boy and girl who lived with her in Portland. Dad invited her to sit and eat with us, and quite suddenly I didn't want her to. I didn't like the way she sat down next to my father. I didn't like the way she laughed at his jokes. And I especially didn't like the way he kept coming up with new ones to make her laugh. It was natural for my father to show off in front of women, but I found myself gritting my teeth. A couple of times I poked his leg with my foot. "Knock it off, Dad," I thought. "You're way overdoing it." Dad ignored me, and we ate together and then had dessert. Finally, it was time to go, and scooting around the booth so quickly it burned my bare legs on the vinyl. "Nice to meet you, Tony," I murmured politely, and I noticed Dad paid for Tony's meal. That wasn't unusual. My dad was very generous, and I had seen him pay for lots of people's meals, men and women alike. He let people borrow his tools and his vehicles, and he was always helping somebody out of a pinch, even people who never returned the favor. Still, that didn't bug me nearly so bad as the way Tony tucked her arm into his on the way out, like she had known him forever. We jumped into the car, and I was eager to get away. "Stay here, kids," Dad said firmly, and shut the door on us. He walked away with Tony around the corner to where she parked. I wanted to get out and take a peek at her and what she was driving, but I knew better than to disobey. Plus, my mother would not be happy with me for judging this woman on the basis of her outward appearance and just one meeting. For a moment, I had the strange feeling that Mom would not have really liked this woman either, though I wasn't sure why. Only a minute or two later, Dad came back to the vehicle, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I wondered then, as we drove away, why the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. So what she's feeling is intuition. So she's feeling her intuition, and she's feeling something's off, and she has this feeling that something just isn't right. So she's already alluding to the fact that she has a feeling, and just stay with me here. We're only on the 6th chapter, but I feel like she's alluding to this feeling because later on we're gonna find out, oh well, this was the time that her dad had killed this victim or this victim or this one. Again, that's just something that I'm catching on to very fairly quickly here. Okay. So chapter 6 is no breaks. A few days after Dad was gone, I was hanging out in the living room with Jason and Carrie. Mom was in the kitchen humming happily. It was her and Dad's 13th anniversary, and I knew she was expecting roses. She had already gotten the vase out and had it off on the side. Flowers brought her enormous pleasure, and she planted them as often as she could at the place we had lived. I listened to her absently as I played with Dad's racing bike. It was a huge bicycle. It had to be to fit his 6'6" frame, and we had to keep it in the living room as there wasn't room anywhere else, and it was his baby. Keeping the kickstand all the way down and over so the back wheel was free, I played with the pedals. Whir, whir. The wheels spun quickly and quickly in one direction. I stared at the chrome, silver, and black as it went by, blurring my vision with the speed. Every once in a while, I could see a small blur of white from the brand name of the wheel, but it was too fast for my mind to seize it and read it. Faster and faster, I turned the pedal, and the wheel magically continued its course with breakneck speed. Zzz, clack! The wheel stopped short when I stood up and applied the brake. I played with the pedals again and again. Whir, whir, whir. Zzz, clack. Carrie came over and watched me for a while, mesmerized like I was. At one point, she put her hand out, tried to stop the wheel. No, I screamed at her. She looked at me with such shock and hurt in her eyes. I knew she was going to cry. Wait, Carrie, see? I pleaded, hoping she wouldn't run to Mom. No sounds came from the kitchen, so I turned back to Carrie. Watch what could happen. If you touch here, it's going too fast and it could burn your skin. Now look at this. I stopped the wheel completely, then stuck my hand between the silver spokes. Ever so lightly, I pressed the pedal and the wheel automatically began to turn, taking my wrist and forearm with it. Ouch, see? I pointed at my arm that was all twisted up in an awkward angle to illustrate my point. You don't want to put your hand anywhere near that thing while it's going. It's way too fast. Yeah, laughed Jason. It would rip your skin right off or even break your arm. He made a move like he was going to come over and push harder on the pedal. I glared at him. This was supposed to be a teaching moment. He was such a brother. I'm smarter than that, Jason, Carrie pouted. I looked at her. Yes, she was. Carrie was a little stinker sometimes because she was so amazingly smart. I purposely let my sister take the next turn on the pedals, even though I knew Jason thought he should be next. He stuck his tongue out at me and went to turn on his video game. The last time he had played it, Dad had been here, challenging him to a match. They played for hours, and I don't think they ever knew who exactly won, which was a first. Jaspersons were notoriously competitive. I glanced around the immaculate living room. Mom kept his room and the rest of the house so clean that the only thing even remotely out of place were my backpack and Jason's video games. Oh, and the bike. The bike. Quickly, I turned my attention back to Carrie and breathed a sigh of relief. She was playing with the pedals like I had been, careful to keep her hands away from the wheel. I thought about how much fun she was to hang out with. Now that she was older, in kindergarten, she was fiery and independent and kept up with me and Jason with little trouble. Despite her independent streak, she was very loving and would usually listen to me, for which I was grateful. She listened to Jason more, but I was okay with that. In a split second, I noticed my sister was concentrating so hard on making the pedals go faster and faster, she didn't notice the big bike beginning to tip. I saw what was going to happen before it did, even though I had my hand on the bike and to steady it. The second it touched down, the tire gripped the carpet floor and sprung forward with violent jolt. Just in time, I pulled it up, almost getting knocked off my feet as I held on to the huge frame, using all my weight to prevent it from smashing onto the floor and doing any damage to the bike. I knew the bike was safe, but I was afraid that the wheel brushing against the wall would make a big black mark, and I pulled it away quickly, steadying myself and avoiding the teething pedals and straps. Carrie, however, wasn't lucky. One pedal had scraped across her shin, and it wasn't deep at all, but I could see some white where the skin had peeled off, and I cringed in empathy. I was glad there wasn't blood because I could never handle it, surprisingly. Carrie didn't cry even as Jason rushed over to assist us. I'm okay, she said. With a look of irritation, she brushed her hands across her sensitive skin. Jason gave her a look of such tenderness that I forgot I was mad at him. I went to get a band-aid for Carrie, even though she claimed she didn't need it. As I put it on, I noticed a shade of red under her white, peeled skin. No bleeding broke though. No bleeding broke through, but I could tell there was going to be a big bruise there. It amazed me how quickly something could get out of control like that. It felt discerning to me, and I didn't like it. I put the bike back up against the wall in its special spot. Neither Carrie nor Jason felt like messing with the machine anymore. Glancing one more time at the bandage on Carrie's shin, I went to help my mother set the table for dinner. Later that night, after we were in bed, I heard Dad came to the door. I smiled. Happy anniversary, I thought, and went back to sleep. The next morning, as the mid-morning sun shone on the game I was playing with Carrie, Mom came into the room. Girls, she said in a firm and tight voice. I immediately knew something was wrong. What is it, Mom? I asked, my eyes alert. Nothing, she said firmly, but then I saw her swallow hard. I need you to pack one thing for the car that is very special to you. Just one thing. We're going on a trip. Her voice had perked up, and she tried to make it sound like it was going to be fun, then briskly left the room to join Jason then briskly left the room to give Jason the same instructions. She wouldn't answer any questions of theirs. Just tried to make it sound like we were going on a great adventure. Carrie and Jason grabbed their items without a second thought, ready for a new quest. I, on the other hand, couldn't decide what to take. Many of my things seemed vitally important to me, but after another moment, I knew exactly what to bring. I decided to pack my boombox since music made everything better and was one of the biggest joys in life. I didn't sing commercials in the tub anymore or pretend I was Dolly Parton, but I did sing every chance I got. Behind me, Mom was rushing around, and I noticed she packed a few items in a bag for each of us. Then she rushed us to the door. Quickly, I glanced back and saw Dad's bike shimmering at the door, opened in the early morning light. Though it was still and silent for a moment, I swore I could see chrome, silver, and black spinning faster and faster. So I don't know. It's leading, like, those two chapters. I mean, the number 5. Okay, I get that why they like gave that information, like, of the person. I don't know who that person was. Like a lady. They're alluding to the fact that the dad's cheating, whatever. But this last chapter, like, why? Like, I don't know, that was just a chapter I don't even think should be in this book. I should have just skipped it altogether. We should have went to chapter 7. So let's see what's on there. All right, so chapter 7, the new game. It was so sudden and unexpected. One moment I was safe in my bed in the hills of Yakima in a loving home with a mom and dad next door to caring grandparents. Then abruptly I was driving with my mother, brother, and sister into absolutely unknown territory, far from anything we had known before. After leaving our home, we stopped to buy a few snacks, including JoJo's that we ate on the way. We left Yakima for good, never to return. Mom continued to play the game that this was some great adventure. Carrie and Jason certainly wanted to believe her, but I could tell there was much more to all of this. I needed answers. For several miles, she refused to respond. I kept asking and asking until she finally broke down. Your father doesn't want us anymore. Great pain shows in her deep brown eyes. She paused. only briefly, and then said, "We're moving to Spokane to live with my mother, your Grandma Frances, until we can get on our feet and get our place of our own." We were astonished and in total shock. It was completely silent in the car for several minutes. Then all of a sudden, it seemed to hit Jason and me about the same time, and we began to cry. When Carrie saw our distress, suddenly she knew this couldn't be good either. She joined in the sobbing, and the car seemed wrapped in a cloud of complete misery. Scenes flashed before my eyes. Some mirrored those flashing by outside the car window. Though they seemed to be far away and unreal, the others were invisible to anyone except me. Didn't want us anymore. Spokane. My grandmother. Place of our own. We have a place of our own, I wanted to argue. Our home in the hills, surrounded by apple and cherry orchards and blossoms and the golden spun sun in the evenings. A home with friends, neighbors, and Lucy and Grandpa. And it was the only place I knew where Dad would come to play with us. Spokane. The word seemed so strange to me, so alien, foreign. Even though Mom said it was the same state, what would it be like? Was it like Yakima or Sella or Tapanash? Like something I had known? I tried to pretend this really was a glorious adventure. I pretended it was some kind of grand vacation that would be over at some point in time, and then we would be home. We were just visiting a family member, that's all, Mom said that Grandma Frances lived in a small house on the outskirts of Spokane, and that one of my mother's brothers lived with her. I remembered that my grandmother had lived in Yakima when Mom was first married, and then she had moved to Spokane. Mom was the only one of the Zorbos family who had stayed behind. The Zorbos family was very different from the Jasperson family. The Jaspersons had all made their own ways far away from each other. We had been the closest to my father's parents, and that had been more due to economics than anything. It took hours and hours of driving, made more difficult because we sobbed all the way there in our anguish. I couldn't help but notice as we finally neared Spokane that the road widened and there were suddenly more cars on the road than I had ever seen in my life. It seemed to me they were speeding by. Mom was a slow and conservative driver, and they were zipping past us at speeds I wasn't familiar with. The frenzied energy continued the closer we approached, and I found myself drawn in fast and fascinated, in spite of myself. I had the familiar unease in my stomach, but I did my best to quiet it. Surely it was because all of this was so unknown to me. I had a sense of wanting the scenes to slow down and even pause so I could take it all in. I felt everything was moving so fast that I would always be running to catch up. "There it is," Mom announced as we headed down the hillside and into the big city. My mouth dropped open, and so did my sisters and brothers. We had all seen some tall buildings before, but not skyscrapers, as Carrie called them. Definitely not like this, so close together. The seatbelt was tight against my belly as I strained to see everything. I didn't want to miss one sight. As we got closer to downtown, we were making quite a ruckus in our excitement, pointing things out to each other. My mother told us firmly that we needed to be quiet. I saw her white knuckles on the steering wheel and understood that she had to concentrate on driving since she was in a big city now. It was such a challenge to be calm and quiet. We were excited to see everything and even enjoyed the fast cars hustling past us, honking at our mother's slow driving. We drove past the bigger city and out into a more suburb type area. I breathed a small sigh, grateful that we would not be living downtown. That kind of dramatic change felt like it would be way too much. As we got closer to my grandmother's house, however, I was still surprised at how close everyone lived to one another. There were no large fields or rows of apple trees between homes. Instead, the houses were literally squeezed right next to one another, and the fences. I had never seen so many fences in our yard. People generally only fenced their yard if they had animals, and that usually was an electric fence, not chain link or privacy fence. It made me feel curious as to how these people lived. My first thought was that they must all really like one another to live so close together. Then in some places I saw iron bars on the doors and windows of shops and even homes. They seemed a little ominous to me, like tiny jails that you could go into and never come out of. Still, many of the houses were unique in styles of ag- architecture I'd never seen before. We started to see people, sorry, we started to see people of all backgrounds and ethnicities. I really was fascinated. I began to feel a building sense of excitement to experience these new lifestyles, new ways of being. We pulled up to my grandma's house and I stared at it for a while. This was to be our new home. Jason, Carrie, and I were feeling rambunctious and ready to finally get out of the car. Mom stopped us. Play out here in the front yard, she instructed, indicating the fenced in area out front. Jason and Carrie protesting, wanting to go inside, but I sensed that Mom needed to explain things to Grandma first, so I convinced the other two to come sit on the grass with me. Our grandmother did not have any toys, so we just sat on the lawn. I was relieved to see kids playing in a couple different areas up and down the street. At least kids played here. We hadn't received any other instructions and were unsure of our new boundaries. I didn't know if we would be allowed to leave the fenced yard, but it was amazing for us to see so many kids. In Yakima, my closest friend lived all the way on the side of the orchard, about a mile from my house, so I wasn't able to simply walk to her house to play. Here, there were kids all over the place, and it seemed like you could step out of your door and play any time. Some of those kids appeared curious about the three of us, and they left the game they were playing in the street and walked over to us. "What's your name?" asked a girl who seemed about my age. We told them who we were and that we were staying with our grandmother. As they asked us more questions like how long we would be staying, I sized up their ages. There was another girl who seemed about my age and a younger girl about Jason's age, though I figured he probably wouldn't want to play with her since she wasn't a boy. We proceeded to ask them questions about who lived in the neighborhood and if there were any boys. I also explained that we did not know how long we were staying. When we were finally allowed inside, I was amazed at how tiny Grandma's place was. Having just lived in a trailer, we were used to tight quarters, but this would be cramped. I felt bad for Grandma Frances, who was a very quiet woman. I wondered if our presence would bother her. She didn't say much, but offered us kind eyes and cinnamon toast. I was famished. She kept making toast, and we kept eating it. Soon I found that I had eaten too many. It was the first time I had eaten and overeaten for comfort. So now we're going into, so she's telling you basically we're already alluding to an eating disorder. So I have a feeling that that's something that's going to come up. Again, guys, I am going to be deep diving into this case. So once my podcast comes out, this will be my first deep dive case. It's going to not be Melissa Moore. It'll be the Happy Face Killer. And then after that, we will focus on the victims. I'll probably do one episode there, but on my YouTube, here on YouTube, I will definitely be doing a case for that and then a case for the victims, or a video. Within 24 hours, my brother and sister and I had all paired up with the neighborhood kids that were our ages. And blessedly, we did not have too much time confined to the yard. After a short period of time, our mother also seemed to adapt into her own environment. We did not see much of her for the next few days as we busied ourselves with our new friends. Sarah Atkins and Katie Clark came to be my closest friends, and it felt good to be busy out in the neighborhood and in other people's homes instead of being in the house with my mom, my uncle, and grandma. Mom told us very little, and it was only on a need-to-know basis. We had no knowledge of the details of our parents' separation. I really didn't even have a clue about my mother's emotional state since she was completely stone-faced around us. When we did ask questions, she refused to provide answers. "You're too young to worry about that, Melissa," my mother said that sunny afternoon in August. Everything is fine. I trusted that Mom knew what she was doing. Since there was no schedule here, I made one up for the sense of security and direction. At first, I also kept track of Jason and Carrie to make sure they were safe, and I always knew where they were. Quite soon, however, it was easier for all of us to go and do our own thing. And so we did. I didn't know that this was the beginning of how life would continue on for us. Each of us going on our separate directions, searching for survival and peace, each seeking what happiness we could in our individual lives. The only control we had was over our summer play, and so why not go for it? I didn't know what my siblings were feeling, since during the time we separated except to come together during neighborhood games. Nighttime was filled with baths, dinner, and preparing for bed. In the evenings, if we talked at all, we shared stuff about our friends and what we did for the day, never expressing our feelings and certainly not our fears. None of us wanted to show weakness or to break the rule of silence. It wasn't that we didn't want to discuss the situation. We simply survived by using the only strategy we knew, pretending that it was okay and that we were happy. No one dared to break the strategy because in our new fragile little world, we did not know any other way to deal with it. Everything at Grandma's that week seemed so temporary, since we only had the few items of clothes Mom had packed for us, plus our one special item. Even the makeshift bed in the basement seemed to indicate to us, of course, this couldn't be permanent. A few days later, however, our father appeared in Grandma's front yard. I ran down the street deliriously happy to see his face and his open arms, until I noticed the trailer. It was packed full of our belongings, and not one item in it belonged to Dad. So we see a separation here. So in chapter 7, it's a sudden separation. So this tells me that Melissa's mother, and again, since I'm going to be doing more research, I should have names and a little bit more backstories to where we can tell the truth, because again, since we have so many similarities to Gypsy Rose Blanchard's book, and I'm going to go over that in the next episode, a little bit of the similarities that we find. I think research is needed, but this shows that her mom didn't want this to affect the kids, and even though it was abrupt, her mom seeing that it was something that was needed. Now, I think that we heard about the girl at the truck stop diner or whatever because this girl may have reached out to her, or maybe other females had reached out to her letting her know about her husband, and things like that. And we have to remember that, again, Melissa at this time is around 8, maybe 9 at this time. So again, we've only heard a small portion of her life up until now, and we hear that basically her dad brought all of their stuff. So again, we're going back and forth to your dad's such a horrible guy, introducing you to another woman while it's literally your parents' anniversary, but yet he did this for you guys. And I don't know, it's a lot of flip-flopping right now. But those are the chapters, guys. So our next episode we'll start with chapter 8, which is called New Discoveries, New Hope. And we'll continue this. But what do you guys think of the book so far? I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts down below. But don't forget to subscribe, and of course, give me a thumbs up down below. Thank you, guys.